Well, the Conservative Party's in a bit of damage control following the departure of two members of their caucus. Opposition House Leader Andrew Scheer tried to put the attention back on the Liberals. Reporters, meanwhile, fired questions about Conservative MP Matt Generou's resignation.
Matt Generou met with the Prime Minister on Tuesday, and he met with other Liberals.
Did Matt Generou say that?
Amid rumors about him crossing the floor.
Sorry, did Matt Generou say that?
We know that he did.
I take Matt Generou at his word. I do not take. I do not take unnamed Liberal sources at the word. I don't respond to rumors.
Okay, it's been that kind of week here in Ottawa. So where does the Conservative Party and its caucus go from here? Well, David Herle is the former campaign co-chair of the Liberal Party, and David McLaughlin is the former chief of staff to Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. Gentlemen, good to see you. We decided we needed as many Davids as possible to talk about what's happening here. David Herle, your view from your perch on this. I mean, a defection is one thing, a resignation is another. We've not heard from Pierre Poilievre outside of like speeches since all of this has happened. Where do you think things are right now for the Conservative caucus?
Well, it sounds like they're pretty bad, because you've had the period since the election where Mr. Poilievre went out and sought re-election to the House of Commons in a by-election where he has eliminated his ban against talking to mainstream media, opened up, seemingly tried to change his tone, and still apparently finds himself in a situation where a significant number of his own caucus, and your report says 12, some other people say 10, I've heard 20 of his caucus members are interested in leaving, which takes us back to the days in the early 2000s under Stockwell Day, where you had a whole branch of that caucus split off. And so the fact that the reports tell us that they have at this point now resorted to coercion to hold caucus members means that things are pretty dark in there, and Mr. Chong's rules are starting to become relevant again, I think.
Yes, this is the piece of legislation advanced by Michael Chong that allows a caucus to remove a leader. Not saying that is what is happening, just for the audience to follow along at home. David McLaughlin, you saw the clip there from Andrew Scheer saying it was Liberal pressure tactics that drove Matt Generou out, which is interesting. That I'm not convinced he issued a statement saying leave my family alone because of what the Liberals were necessarily doing. But how do you view where things stand on this Friday?
Well, it's really been a remarkable week. When you think about it, look back. We started the week wondering whether or not the Mark Carney government would survive and whether or not the budget would pass. We're ending the week knowing the budget's going to pass and wondering whether Pierre Poilievre was going to survive. And so there's been like a complete turnaround in certain respects. So, the Conservative caucus has to be a bit rattled, by this. I don't know how bad it is, but they certainly have to be rattled. It was an unusual week in the sense that you have two MPs say, they're kind of voting non-confidence in their own way. One saying, look, I'm clearly going to move over to the Liberals. The other resigning, saying, I wasn't coerced. Well, why would you say that unless perhaps there's something, kind of going on in there?
Well, there was a lot of reporting saying he was, right? So I think he was kind of felt compelled to respond to that, right? So
I understand. Yeah. But the whole thing just was not, if it was true in the way it was set out, it was not choreographed very well. And so it raises all sorts of other questions, which means you and others are going to legitimately ask, is this it? Is there more? That could happen. So we end the week, a very consequential week, with the Conservative Party and its opposition to the Liberals weakened, and the Liberal government actually standing a bit stronger, a bit firmer, and looking forward, and the Conservatives are looking back. And so that's not what certainly the Conservatives thought they were going to be at.
Not ideal. I mean, David Herle, do you think, what's your sense of the process dynamic here? Do you think the Liberals are out hunting for a majority, or are they sitting back in their catcher's gear, looking for anything that comes at them so they can grab it? What's your read?
I think it's both. I think there is genuine dissatisfaction in the Conservative caucus about Mr. Poilievre's leadership. He's a divisive person, not just in the country, but in his own party. And so he's got a lot of very, very strong supporters in that caucus, but it's not at all surprising that he's got some people who, now that the prospect of power seems a little bit more distant than it did 8 or 9 months ago, are chafing under his leadership a little bit. But it's also the case that I think the Liberals are out hunting. And it's an illustration, David, if I might say, of one of the things that makes this government different from previous governments, which is the the role that caucus and cabinet are playing in the political management of the government relative to the role that is being played by the PMO and staff is quite striking. In previous governments, politics has been exercised by the staff, and cabinet ministers are kind of left out of it, and caucus members. But I think that the PMO is relatively weaker under Mr. Carney, and cabinet and caucus are relatively stronger in terms of their influence over the political management of the government.
Explain what you mean there. You think it's cabinet ministers talking to Chris D'Entremont and things like that? Is that what you see there? Yeah.
There's MPs and ministers who've been working these people sometimes for years on flights and in coffee breaks and in breaks from the House of Commons, who've been talking to them, building relationships, perhaps reinforcing to them the lack of commonality between a Nova Scotia conservative and a rural Alberta conservative, and building that. Yes, I think it's very much a caucus-driven exercise.
Interesting. I mean, David McLaughlin, I wonder what we make of what we know about this week, right? Like Chris D'Entremont, I'm told, met with Mark Carney at 80 Wellington on Monday evening. Tuesday, we were in the budget lockup. The story posts on Politico that he's openly thinking about crossing the floor. Sometime after that, Andrew Scheer and Chris Workington, the House leadership, went to Chris D'Entremont's office without an invitation or a meeting and went in there and tried to get him to stick around and stay. But he left anyway, and now here they are. I mean, so how do you, as a leader, Mr. Poilievre and his leadership team, who just lost the 4th national election, lost your own seat, have come back but have now lost 2 members, how do you approach what's left of your caucus to keep it inside?
Well, it appears that they're approaching it with a heavy hand. And I mean, that can work to a certain degree. I mean, politics is a team sport, and everybody does understand that you have to work together, and you work together if you want to succeed. You hang separately, you hang all together here. So there is that impetus to do that. And that's strong in every party.
Yeah.
But if you have the kind of dissension, or if you have the kind of chafing that David is referenced, then that heavy hand might not work quite as well. And so you do need a bit more of, look, we need you here. This is why you belong. This is why we work together, etc. So you're going to use whatever kind of tools of persuasion that you have. But at the end of the day, it's still a political calculus. Mr. D'Entremont figured, take him at his word publicly, I can't win next time out as a Conservative in Nova Scotia. And I'm kind of more aligned with what the Mark Carney, a progressive Conservative government perhaps, might be doing, or where it's
liberal. Blue liberal.
Well, like the Atlantic Tories are just different than a Western Alberta Conservative, right? It is a different political culture, a different political style,
for God's sakes, by of course.
Yeah, exactly.
We're
talking to a New Brunswicker, right? But your point on loyalty and discipline, they work better when they're voluntary.
Absolutely.
Right? Not when they have to be imposed through consequence, intimidation. This is a challenge.
And sure, and so when you have an MP resigning in advance, and that, I mean, in the same week where all these questions are percolating, it's a very weird dynamic, because if you were going to resign for whatever reason, you would, and you still cared about the party and the leadership, and that you would want to do it at a different time in a different way. The fact that, the genie, the general, was put back in the bottle, if you will, and that, but not very well. And so we keep having these kinds of dynamics. Look, there's trouble in River City. The question is, how much, and we'll get clarity on this post-leadership review, but the stakes have just been raised for Mr. Poilievre and the party.
So David Herle, on that, I mean, Matt Genereux, in some ways did Mr. Poilievre a favor by resigning and not defecting, and by holding off on his resignation probably until after the leadership review is over. So not facing the prospect of maybe losing an Edmonton seat in a by-election, because that one was within 3,000 votes on election day. That doesn't take the problem away. So what do you think this does to Mr. Poilievre's leadership and his ability? Like, I still think he'll probably survive the leadership review, no problem, but the viability of it beyond that.
Well, yes, because the leadership review is only one indication, and everybody knows that Mr. Poilievre can pack a room, and the Ford Conservatives from Ontario aren't really participating in the process. So there's going to be a lot of question marks around that number. I think the more serious threat to Mr. Poilievre comes from his own caucus and from the Michael Chong rules that allow them to replace him. And I would just observe I don't know anything. I don't know what's true, but I would just observe that if that caucus comes to believe that the leader's office has Oppo research on them, that could blow to smithereens.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic.
Parties don't work without trust. You know, they try to achieve trust with the electorate, obviously, but we sometimes forget about that internal trust that is required. And if there is a schism that happens, then, you know, there's something happening between the leader and the caucus, then that starts to corrode after that. And I agree with David. I think the threat will come from the caucus in a more traditional way. It's what happened to Mr. O'Toole, even without the Chong rules. At a certain point, the caucus says, that's it. We can't win with you. We can't work with you or something. And it just has to be enough. It's what happened with Chrysler Freeland and Justin Trudeau, too. So it's not surprising.
Yeah, the caucus is one thing. The base is another. And the base is not necessarily looking for change from Mr. Poilievre. It's people outside of that word.
That's right. And he may get a rally around the flag, a rally around the leader effect, too, that will help him in that leadership review. But as David says, we have to look at what that number and what it really means. It'll be an indicator, a guidepost, but it may not be the whole story.
Yeah, the key number, one defection. That can't go up. I think that's what I was going to say there. All right, we got to leave it there. David McLaughlin, David Herle, appreciate the time. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here.
Pleasure.